will show up on Ropecon YouTube eventually. One more seat. No, take it already. Sorry.
Is it picked or not? Okay, sorry. Yeah. Okay, so.
Wow, okay. So that happened. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad you A, got through the first door, and B, got through the second door. This is unexpected, but I'm so happy to see so many of you here willing to listen to me for the next 40 odd minutes. I just flew in from Australia, and boy is my slideshow bad. Thank you, I've been working on that for weeks. Yeah, so I've spent the last week visiting family over in Australia, which means I have had to do this on my phone. So it's not the greatest technological marvel that you're going to see here on the screen, but we are dealing with the Middle Ages, so consider it a technical marvel anyway. My name is Janica. I am a role player. I am a tourist guide, and I am a self-titled expert on recreating historical recipes. I can call myself that because I don't think there is actually any official organization handing out those titles, so I've taken it upon myself. Out of curiosity, was anyone at my presentation last year? Oh, wonderful. Repeat offenders. Well, last year I spoke of Roman cuisine, and now we're actually hopping forward in time by over 1,000 years. And yet we're still almost 1,000 years from today. Yes?
Can we take pictures?
Yes, absolutely. I almost require you to take pictures because I am today going to tell you about this recipe collection, Libellus de Arte Coquinaria, and I will give you recipes. There will be recipes up here on the board. You can take photos and cook your own medieval Danish food. That's the whole point of this. It's a practical thing. Okay, so Libellus de Arte Coquinaria, Little Book on the Art of Cooking. We don't know who wrote it. It may have been a guy called Henrik Harpestring. Yeah, Henry Harpstring, Harry Harpstring. What a name for your next bard character. Go for it. He was a Danish physician. What's typical of medieval recipes, as they are come down to us, is that they are very often included in medicinal papers. During the Middle Ages, people, well, the learned at least, treated food as a type of medicine. If you're at all familiar with the Middle Ages and what passes for medicine at the time, you've heard of the humor theory, that we have 4 humors in our body, and it goes back to the ancient Greeks with their ideas of everything being made up of earth, fire, water, and air. The idea then being that the human body has the same thing, and that illnesses in the human body come from our humors being unbalanced. We have too much of the hot, or too much of the cold, we have too much air, or we have too much something. And that food plays a role in this, and that by eating the right sort of food, you can keep your humors in balance, and then you will stay healthy. So that's why it makes sense that recipes get passed down to us by physicians. And Henrik Harpestring was a physician. He was a physician to the Danish king sometime in the 1200s. He died sometime around 1244, which means that since the recipe collection we're talking about today, since it's been passed down to us in his papers, it means that the latest possible date for it is 1244. You follow me? Because if he wrote it, then has to be from before he died. Right? Unless he's, yeah. But of course there is the chance, and it's a real possible chance, that he didn't actually write these recipes, but that he copied them from an earlier source. And this takes us to the question of dating dating this recipe collection. And I want to talk to you briefly. Oh, hey, can you all hear me well? There's a microphone here, but I'm usually fairly good at speaking in a big room. So if it gets too hard to hear me in the back, just holler.
I think it's better to actually use the microphone because the filming.
Good point. Okay, now I need to modify my volume so I don't scream at you. This is always very difficult. Okay, I would like to tell you about my love of stematology. Very briefly, because then we need to talk about actual cooking. So, stematology is a fascinating subject which has to do with analyzing handwritten documents. So we're talking in the Middle Ages here, obviously, pre-printing press, everything is written by hand. So whenever someone wants a copy of something, wants a book or a text, he has to pay someone to copy it or copy it himself. Now, if you've ever been in a situation where you're given a piece of text and you have to copy it, you know you're going to make mistakes. It's just natural. Now, what stematology does, okay? This, I'm trying to get this straight in my head. So, this recipe collection, there are 4 copies of it in existence. 4 different documents. And stematology takes the existing copies of a given document and compares the mistakes in the text. Because imagine that you have the original text, and then someone writes a copy of that and makes a mistake, and someone else writes a copy of it and doesn't make mistakes. At that point, you have 2 different versions of it. You have version 1 and version 2. And version 2 has an error in it. Now someone copies version 2 and copies the error as well, right? So you can do these sort of family tree type things for documents and figure out how they relate to each other and when they've been copied. And through all this, what does this have to do with anything I'm talking about right now? It has to do with dating this cookbook. Because by comparing the 4 existing copies that we have, one of which was found in the papers of this harpstring fella, we can conclude that there is actually an earlier text that they have all been copied from. So there is an older version. Which means, and this is something that people who do medieval recreational cooking are very excited about if they know about this, which means that this might actually be very, very close to being the oldest medieval recipe collection in existence. Now, the most famous medieval recipe collection in existence is the Form of Curie. If you are on any English sites, read up on medieval cooking, this is what everyone goes to. It's an English document from the court of Richard II, and it also falls in the sort of 1300s bracket. But it is possible that this is older. I'm very excited about this. I don't know if anyone else is. But there you have it. So, what can we say? Well, I'll briefly talk to you a little bit more about what stematology tells us and what we know about this document, or more accurately, these documents. So, there is an urtext, the original, which is at least from the early 1200s, possibly even late 1100s. But hard to say. And it might possibly be in German. So we are dealing with, I've entitled this lecture, Dine like a Dane, because the oldest of these 4 copies that we have is in Danish. So at some point, this text either has been written in what is today the Schleswig-Holstein region where Denmark and Germany sort of meet, or then it's been written earlier and traveled to Denmark with harpstring. But yeah, so that's what we're dealing with. And the 4 copies that do exist are, 2 of them are in Old Danish, one of them is in Icelandic, and one of them is in Low German. And this is something else that I find incredibly exciting. Is there anyone in the audience who speaks German? Okay, a couple. Anyone speak Swedish? Uh-huh. Dutch? Yeah, yeah, okay. What I find incredibly exciting about this is that I speak Swedish, and I have here an example of one of the recipes in the collection. And this is Old Danish. I can read this, and I can understand it. I can't understand a modern Dane. I've heard stories that they don't understand each other either. I believe it. But this is great. This is great. So, what do we have here? Man skall ett ungt höns I toskära och svepa där hela salviablad och skär I späck och salt och hyll that höns med deg och lata bäka I en hogn sva som bröd. Take a chicken, flavor it, wrap it in dough, put it in the oven, bake it like bread. I'm going to give you the recipe in a minute. So this language, I find it delicious. I find it wonderful to read. And the same actually goes then for the Icelandic and the German as well. You can kind of follow it. If you speak English, if you speak Swedish, you can kind of follow it. And I think that's wonderful. This is 800-year-old text. And it's still there. It's all there. Cooking, I suppose, is a thing we've always done. And we don't have to come up with new words. We can use the same words we've always used, more or less. Now, speaking of medieval cooking, we have to talk about the elephant in the room. We have to talk about spices. So if there's one thing everyone knows about medieval cooking, it's that the medieval kitchen used an enormous amount of spices. And how many of you know that they used all these spices to cover up the fact that the meat they were using was often of poor quality? Show of hands. Who's heard that? Yeah, okay. So how many of you like to put chili on your food? So what's wrong with your meat? You can't hide bad ingredients with spices, no matter how many spices you put in there. You just can't. Rotten meat is rotten meat, and that's. There are people who are into my line of weirdness, and they've actually tested this. They actually let their ingredients go rancid, and then put spices in there. And went, nope, still not edible. But that doesn't change the fact that yes, medieval cuisine uses a great deal of spices. Not to hide any flavors, but to enhance. And also there's a money side to it as well. I'll get to that in a sec. But yeah, so like medieval food in general, this recipe collection has recipes that uses a great deal of spices. But what's interesting about this when compared to other European recipe collections from the Middle Ages, we got recipe collections from England, we got some from France, we got some Italian ones, we got a couple of Andalusian ones, so from further down south. What's interesting about this one is that all the spices in this recipe collection you can find at the shop right now. There's nothing weird. If you read some of the stuff from Italy and Spain and France, you'll run into things like malagueta pepper and long pepper, which is on my picture here, and spikenard and rue and goodness knows things that you can get but that are extremely difficult to get. But this book, this collection uses spices that we are still familiar with: cinnamon, aniseed, cardamom, and herbs: thyme, parsley, sage. Unsurprisingly, herbs that will grow in your yard here in Finland every summer without problem, if you plant them, that is, obviously. So what does this mean? It could mean that certain spices were more difficult to acquire here. Perhaps up in the north, well, I'm talking about Denmark now, obviously. Perhaps some spices were more difficult to come by, or perhaps they were considered too expensive. I don't know. What's important to remember here is we don't actually know who this was written for. We don't know who the target audience of this collection was. Well off, yes, but not necessarily enormously rich, as we'll see from some of the recipes I'll show you in a minute. But yeah, so spices were expensive, and that's one of the reasons why they were used to such an extent, I suspect. Because once you start, you know, if you go to the shop now and you buy your spices, they'll come in a sealed jar. Not in the Middle Ages, they'll come in a sack. You know, and spices go bad. They don't go bad, but they lose their potency. We're told that we should keep our spices in a sealed jar away from sunlight to extend the shelf life. Now, imagine 800 years ago, bag of cinnamon is making its way from Ceylon via, you know, there's a camel carrying it and then it's loaded onto a wagon and trundled along, and then maybe a ship for a bit, and then it sits in the ports for ages waiting for customs to clear, and before it makes its way all the way to Denmark, it has lost a lot of potency. So I suspect there might be a little bit of that as well. Like, I've tried to make these recipes and use the ratio of spices, and it becomes inedible. But I suspect that is because my stuff is fresh. But yeah, anyways, so that's one reason for lots of spices, I suspect. Another reason definitely is status. You show off with food, and we still do that. We still show off with food, and there's nothing wrong with that. Food is great. Show off. But yeah, so if you can serve a dish, if you can serve a sauce that consists mainly of cinnamon, then you're really, really rich. I make it today, and but there we have it. Did I want to say something else about spices? Yeah, you must excuse me. I've been in the country for less than 24 hours. I'm still a little bit mixed up. Yeah, actually, one thing I did want to say still about spices is putting this in a larger Scandinavian context for a minute. Harpstring, who I mentioned earlier, he was the physician, for a while at least, for the King of Denmark, who at the time was, I have to check my pages, Erik IV Blugbendig. Now, Erik was married to a lady called Jutta, who was from Saxon. So that's in Germany. Erik's brother, who also became king, was Christopher, and he was married to a lady called Margareta. She was from Poland. Their mother was called Berengaria, and she was from Portugal. So when we're thinking about these recipes, we might also want to keep in mind the fact that we are dealing with a very, very international world. It's easy to be lulled into the belief that, oh, well, in the Middle Ages, before proper roads and stuff, people didn't move around, people didn't travel or anything like that. No, they totally did. They absolutely did. Maybe not the poorest, but possibly even them. And that means that ideas and recipes and influences would also travel. There was an excavation in Turku last year, I think, where they dug up a latrine. Yes, a medieval toilet. From about 100 years after this recipe collection was written. And in that toilet, they found grape seeds, they found fig seeds, and they found seeds of a very rare exotic spice called grains of paradise. It comes from West Africa. That was in Turku. Very recently, there was also, this was a slightly bigger thing in the news, a shipwreck. Did anyone see that? Danish shipwreck. Again, from about 100 years after this collection was written. But yeah, the shipwreck of a Danish king, whichever king it was, I can't remember. Hans, I think. Could be a Christian, they were all called that. And he'd been on his way, he'd gone to Sweden, because at the time there was borders of shifting and all that. So he was on his way to Sweden, and he was going to show off because he wanted to show them that he was the real king of Scandinavia. So he was on his way there. He wanted to show off, and so he had a bunch of ships bring over a whole bunch of stuff. And one of those ships sank, and archaeologists found it quite recently, and this was in the news. I think it was earlier this year. it was completely loaded with spices. It was completely filled to the brim with ginger, cinnamon, cardamom. Again, showing off. But again, showing us that we here in Scandinavia, we weren't cut off. We weren't separate from anything, from the rest of Europe in any way. We were very, very closely tied through ideas and through trade routes. Okay, let's see what we do with those spices. Let's talk recipes. This recipe collection has 30 odd recipes altogether. I'm going to present you with 5. Roughly speaking, you can divide the recipes in it into 3 groups. I've started with the least palatable. I swear it gets better. I swear it gets better. But yeah, so roughly you can divide the recipes in this collection into 3 groups. So there's one section which covers sort of milk dishes, and this is from that. What's interesting about that is there are multiple recipes for how to make milk from almonds and from other nuts. If you think milk substitutes are a new thing, you are wrong. And this actually is quite interesting because it shows the influence of religion on cooking. During the Middle Ages, all of Europe basically was still Catholics, and Catholics spend a lot of time fasting. It's 2 days a week? Correct me if I'm wrong. Could be 3? No, it's Orthodox do 3. 2? Anyway, so there's a lot of fasting happening, also before Christmas and before Easter and so on. And whenever the Catholics would fast, there was no meat, and there was no animal products. No animals on land products. Fish were okay. Beavers too, because they're in water. So a couple of days a week, several months a year, you're not allowed to drink milk. So you make a milk substitute, and you make it out of almonds. Which means that, in Denmark, you could just import almonds and make it into milk, no problem. Again, connectedness. Yeah, so that's the first group, is milk-based dishes. Then there are sauces, and I have 2 sauces for you. And then, and this is interesting, out of those 30-odd recipes, 17 are chicken dishes. Does that mean the Danes really like chicken? I don't know. Chicken was a bit more of an expensive meat, so it could be that. Maybe we're missing the second half, which had all the other meats. We don't know. This is what we have, so this is what we deal with. So I have 2 chicken recipes for you here as well. And all of these have ingredients and methods that you can make in your home kitchen, no problem. The only special equipment that you might need is a mortar and pestle. If you ever want to cook food older than 100 years, a mortar and pestle is your friend. You can get one at IKEA, it's no problem. Okay, so yeah, white mush. The original recipe calls it hvitmus. So yeah, in Finnish that would be valkoinen muusi. Like moose refers to what you do with potatoes nowadays, but in the Middle Ages, no potatoes. So, and yeah, this is kind of weird. So you take bread and you take egg and you take milk and then you cook them together, just gently. And I mean, it wasn't bad. You can try it. It was weird. It's like you're eating almost but not quite scrambled eggs, but it's a liquid. And and I don't know, but hey, it's entirely possible that the Danish king had this for breakfast. So who are we to judge? The recipe says to serve it with cinnamon and a dollop of butter. My personal suggestion is that you might want to add something to it. The original doesn't even have salt, which might be because butter was much more salty then than it is now. That could be it. So you might want to add salt and pep it up a bit with some raisins or nuts. But yeah, give it a try. Why not?
The bread was also salty.
Very possible, yes. My base assumption is that everything was saltier then, so think accordingly, yeah.
Double baked grain, so it's like fortified porridge.
Yeah. Feel free to fortify more with a splash of rum or something. You might need it. Oh man, I should have put a picture here. I made a dish of this over in Australia for myself for breakfast, and then I did eat it, but I couldn't finish all of it because it was fairly big. And there was a golden retriever sitting by my side, going, "How you doing?" So I hand him the bowl, and he,
Did you use fat-free milk or?
it was something in Australia that I think it wasn't quite half and half, but it had fat in it. Yeah, might want to do more. Again, milk then would have had cream in it too, so all these things that we have to take into account. Like I said last year, if anyone was listening to me last year, when recreating historical recipes, we have to accept the fact that we can't. Not fully, not ever. We can never get that same result. Ingredients have changed. Plants have changed. Animals have changed. What we eat today is the product of thousands of years of selective breeding. And for this, we'd have to go back 1,000 years in selective breeding to get that same taste. When we cook chicken later on here, it's not going to be the sort of chicken, if I go buy broiler at the shop, it's not going to be the sort of chicken that ran around in Copenhagen 700 years ago. It's going to be a lot fleshier.
Even going to be the chicken you bought 20 years ago.
Exactly. Exactly.
Still got like old lady hands.
Yes, yes. So this is just something that we have to accept and deal with, that we can recreate, but we can never fully grasp what something tasted like. Another interesting thing that I've been thinking about is also the fact that up until 100 years ago, most food would have been cooked on an open fire. So there would have been a smoke flavor, most likely. A touch of that. Yes?
I really need to know how the dog reacted.
Oh, right! No, sorry! See, I went off on a tangent of a tangent. I'll do that. The dog sniffed at the bowl and then looked at me and went, "Are you serious?" But then I stood up and took the bowl and walked away, at which point the dog went, "No, no, 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 no. Let's not be too hasty." And then she did eat it in the end. Anyway, onward to sauces. That first one was a bit of a joke. This is good. This is great. Medieval mustard. So ingredients are all things you can buy at the shop. You need honey, vinegar, aniseed, a bit of cinnamon, and mustard powder. If you've never made mustard at home or used it, you can actually buy mustard powder in most shops. It's a Coleman's mustard powder. It comes in a yellow box. Ask the shopkeepers. So this is one of those recipes that came with ratios. So it said to this and this much honey, put this and this much mustard seeds, and so on. And I did make it with those ratios. Wasn't good, so I adjusted the ratios a little bit. Why wasn't it good? I don't know. I was using mustard powder. The original you would use mustard seeds. Maybe that makes a difference. Vinegars can taste different. It could be a bunch of things. But so here it is. And this is if you've made mustard before, this is a super easy one because this one you just mix together. There's no cooking, no heating of the ingredients involved. You just basically mix the ingredients together, let it stand for a bit because it'll be a bit runny at first, but then it'll solidify, and then spread it on whatever you're planning on eating. I fully acknowledge the fact that there is no possible way to take a good photo of a sausage. That's actually, my friend handmade that sausage out of meat that he had hunted. That's hare sausage. And it looks, yeah. But you couldn't get a better sausage than that. But yeah, so take the photo with a grain of salt. And yeah, so this mustard is great. Like I say here in the recipe, make it, put it on whatever you put mustard on, but be careful, because it will punch you in the face. This is strong stuff. You think you buy strong mustard from the shops? Feed this to your friends next time. They'll know they're alive. Here you can see again the spices. The idea of putting cinnamon in mustard. Who'd have thought? But it gives the mustard a lovely color, actually. And it tastes a little bit cinnamony as well. Mainly it tastes of mustard and vinegar. But it's nice. It's nice. I swear it's nice. Promise. Another sauce. This one doesn't have a name. So some of these recipes in the texts have original names, but some of them just say another one. This is another one. So this recipe is preceded by a green sauce. So then the next bit in the text says another one, another green sauce. And this one was interesting because there's so many fresh herbs in this. This is very much an herb-based sauce. And what's also interesting about this recipe collection and the sauces is that it gives us instructions. It tells us what to do with them. It'll say something like, this sauce will only keep for 3 days. Or this sauce is good for 6 months if kept in a cask. Or this sauce is good for hunting. So probably you'd put it in a cask and take it with you when you're out hunting so you can put some sauce on your food when you stop for a snack. I don't know. It also has a sauce for poor people, but obviously I wouldn't give that to you. No, we're dealing with the rich people's food here. So yeah, bunch of herbs. We've got here parsley, sage, and thyme. No rosemary. And then some spices, well, cinnamon and salt. And then again, the vinegar. The vinegar comes in a lot. When making these, use whatever vinegar you like. I have some idea of what sort of vinegar may have been accessible. Most likely, the original recipes would have dealt with some sort of wine vinegar. But, use whichever vinegar you like. If you pick a flavored vinegar, like an apple vinegar or something, that'll obviously give a little bit of flavor to the food you're cooking. So, play around. And this is where I pulled out my mortar to actually make this the old-fashioned way and pound them. Don't do that. Use a stand mixer if you have one. They're your friend. When it comes to cutting corners and making things easier for myself, I tend to take them because the way I see it, my ancestors, my spiritual ancestors in the kitchen 700 years ago, if they had access to a hand mixer, they would have used it. So why wouldn't I? But this particular time, I actually didn't have a stand mixer. I only had access to a mortar and pestle. But anyway, yeah, so ingredients in a bowl, whiz them up, and you've got a really, really nice, fresh, green, flavorful sauce. The recipe says this sauce is good for lamb. Again, they're being very helpful. And so, being in Australia, they eat a lot of lamb there. That's what we ended up doing. But obviously, with these sauces, you can put them on anything. Right now, I'm very sorry, I'm not presenting you with a lot of vegan alternatives, or even vegetarian alternatives here, because medieval cooking is not particularly vegetarian. And this recipe collection actually has, apart from the sauces, it has no recipes that don't have some sort of animal product. But with a little bit of imagination and putting things together, you can use this for any dish. Okay, so those are our sauces. Then what do we have? We have chickens in brouet. Chickens in broth, basically. Now, this recipe was an example of how it can be challenging sometimes to recreate the exact same effect in your home kitchen. The recipe says to put a chicken in a pot and heat it up, and then to cook it in its own juices. Now, if you get some chicken from the shop and you put it in a pot and put it on the stove, it's not gonna exude any juices. You're just gonna burn the chicken. But apparently, if you're using an unglazed earthenware pot, it will actually somehow make the chicken like actually draw out. Yes. If you take a special cast iron or other thick bottom pot and put it from the beginning on full maximum, but medium heat to low heat, and heat it up like that, it will also do. It will actually heat it up. There you go. So yeah. So recreating something is challenging because you don't always necessarily have the right equipment, have the same equipment to create the same effect. So my solution is just to put a bit of water in there and cook it in that. But yeah, so essentially here, what you have is chicken, which is cooked in some water, and then flavored with butter, vinegar, again, they like vinegar, some fresh herbs, parsley and mint, and then again, the recipe doesn't call for salt, but I would put some in. And yeah, I served this to my in-laws, and they said it was good, so that's something. I was allowed to live in their house for another 2 weeks. So yeah, no, I recommend this. I mean, this is so simple. This is so quick to make, and you can serve it to whoever and say, yeah, this is a genuine medieval dish. Right, I have one more recipe, and then we'll have time for questions if you have any. I've saved the best for last. These are amazing. They don't look like it, but they are. They look kind of boring. So we're coming full circle. We're coming back to that snippet of text I showed you at the beginning, which was the original text. And so this is chicken in pastry. Pullus in pastello. That's what the recipe is called. How to make chickens in pastry. Now, here with this one, again, it takes a little bit of trying to figure out what exactly may have been meant by this recipe. It says to take half a chicken. Okay, yes. It says to take half a chicken, but don't do that. Get chicken from the shop. You get chicken breasts or chicken fillets, whatever. And then the recipe says to wrap it in dough and bake it. Now, in the Middle Ages, it's actually quite common to cook something in a pastry casing and not eat the pastry itself. So it's often the case when you have a pie in a medieval text, is that you would have a casing of dough, and then you'd put the ingredient, the stuff in there, and put a lid on, again made of dough, but that pastry would only serve as a cooking vessel. Then you'd break it apart and you'd eat the inside. However, so I mean, it's possible that that's what this means. However, the recipe says at the end, bake it like bread, which I've taken to mean that you would eat the pastry as well. You might interpret it differently. Feel free to, but this is how I interpret it. And like I said, this is delicious. So what you do is you get a packet of chicken, then you get a packet of dough from the shop. Again, cut corners, no problem. I've tried this with frozen pie dough. It's great. I've tried it with frozen puff pastry, voitaikina, also great. So whichever suits your fancy. Where's my hat? Roll it out. Cut the chicken into the sized pieces you want. Put the chicken on the dough. Then put in some sage leaves, bacon, salt, pepper if you want. Wrap it up, bake it in the oven, and you have a treat that you can just grab and eat as it is, or you can dip it in some sort of sauce. I've done this twice now, served it to my friends. They have absolutely loved them. The bacon in there, they get so nice and greasy, and you're still eating chicken, so you can pretend it's healthy and good for you. And the fact that you just hold it in your hand and eat it is wonderful. If you could imagine someone in Copenhagen in the 14th century walking down the street and grabbing one of these from a street-sized stall and just walking on in the nippy January weather, munching on this warm chicken pastry treat. And with that, I will finish this and take questions for 5 minutes. Less than 5 minutes. Yes, go ahead. There's hands up.
Hi. Do you actually provide a recipe for the dough?
No. The original recipe, one of the versions says a wheaten dough. That's all it says. So that's why it's up to interpretation. Bake it like bread could mean that it's supposed to be yeasty and therefore rise, maybe, or maybe it's bake it like bread just because you put it in the oven the way you do with bread. That's why I've tested a couple of different ones. You can obviously also make your own dough if you make your own dough for bread or pizza or whatever. I mean, it's basically flour and water and then maybe some butter in it. But flour and water is already a dough. So you can experiment. Yes, there's a question. Sorry. Yes.
Did they have any malt vinegar during that time?
I don't actually know. Vinegar is a thing that I've been sort of digging into and trying to figure out what they could have had, what they could have turned into vinegar. And yeah, I would say, I mean, in the north, it's also possible that they would have had some sort of mead-based vinegar or cider-based vinegar. It's possible. But wine vinegar is probably the most likely, would be from wine or then from unripe grapes. Yes, there's a questions in the back if you pass down there.
Hi, and thanks for a fantastic talk. I'm very baffled by the idea of baking something and then just using the dough as a vessel.
Yes,
because it seems like a huge waste of resources. So why did people do that?
Well, this is something again that rich people would have done. I've never tested it myself. There are YouTube videos out there of people doing it. I'm guessing it to some extent has to do with like the conditions that you create within that dish. But yeah, no, it baffles me a little bit as well. It's something that I've only just begun to really dig into. I think I'll have time for one more question. Yes. Sorry, YouTube can't hear you.
Well, sometimes the dough was not exactly part of the food. It was a container for the food, and if you had it somewhere for a period of time, the outside may be molded and very nasty, but the inside is still edible.
That's true actually, yeah. There are ways of like preserving meat. And actually one of the sauces in this collection has a huge amount of vinegar in it, and the instructions say if you put meat in this sauce, it will keep for X amount of months. So yeah, it might have to do with food preservation as well. Okay, hey, that is our time. Thank you very much for this. Now, I will be at Ropecon all weekend. Feel free to nudge me in the corridors to have a chat and ask any questions that you might still have on your mind. And also, if you have any requests for what time period or part of the world you'd want me to talk about next year, let me know. Thank you.